나는 그저 서 있을 뿐이었어.
I am NetMoverSitan. Welcome to the intro to my Limbus Company lore series. Yes, I've been planning this for a while. Let's start with, what is a limbus? A limbus is the border between the transparent part of the cornea and the sclera. The transparent and the opaque, colour and structure, a part of the eye, which is somewhat fitting based on Limbus Company, where they seek out that which has become unseen and almost forgotten, for at least 6 months as of the end of Leviathan. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Let's do a recap of what's happened so far. Previously in the Project Moon universe. The Mechanical Rebellion, an event that was so long ago that it was almost a myth. An event that likely led to the ban of AI within the city, which ushered in the age of humanity and the rise of the head, the rulers of the city, which is really a megacity, as each district is the size of a large city as we would know it. Except even more packed, as the total population is approximately 6 billion, where discrimination about things such as gender and sexual orientation are ancient history there. It's other things that are in Diarrheaville, as each district is ruled over by one of the wings of the world, which are mega corporations, barons ruling over their private fiefdoms. As long as they don't violate certain laws that would get some unwanted attention by the head, they can do what they want, within reason. But all that matters to each wing are their nests, the most secure parts of the city, and the best parts. As long as the wing hasn't fallen. If it does, the inhabitants are in for a rude awakening from the vengeful syndicates that rule the backstreets. Speaking of which, the backstreets are the nastier parts of the city, where, as long as the more serious laws are followed, which can vary depending on the wing that runs that district, they don't give a about it. The syndicates, as in organized crime, conducts their business with a mix of their own rules, their methodology, and a large dose of fear. The top 5 syndicates, the top of the pile, are called the Fingers. They're powerful rivals. Yes, their power rivals that of the wings. Each side understands that they're in an uneasy spoken truce, that as long as they don't intrude too much on each other's affairs, they leave each other alone. Although that doesn't mean that they won't be opposed by the more combat-oriented fixers, the mercenaries, which, in the Project Moon universe, is about as common in that world as retail workers are in ours. They have a variety of specializations, such as peacekeeping, workshop management, assassination, all-out war, information gathering, even glorified lawyers. But there are far more exotic threats than fixers, or even those that have undergone full-body cybernetic replacement. Similar to the Cybermen in Doctor Who, but much less standardized. I'm of course talking about abnormalities. Eldritch horrors that take many forms. Some look truly monstrous. Some are twisted takes on familiar works of fiction. A few are even anime come to life. A few of these are natural, but most were created by the singularity of Lobotomy Corporation. the wing that was in charge of District 12. Their singularity was physically manifesting the mind, which created many abnormalities from humans. The pain and suffering of the employees working on them created enkephalin, a clean energy source that made them a major power supplier. But for Ayn, one of the founders of that wing, it wasn't enough. He wanted to finish what Carmen, one of the other founders, started. So he and Benjamin, the third founder of the Botany Corporation, took an illegal undertaking after Carmen killed herself in a bath, which became the abnormality bloodbath. And then many were killed in the lab in the outskirts, a place where impurities in any that even the backstreets won't accept are left to rot, where the head wanted to prevent the creation of that AI, which ended up causing the event. Angela was the product of that endeavor. This was an undertaking so illegal, it caused an arbiter and 2 claws to be sent to wipe them out. Normally, that would be overkill, as one of either would be usually enough. In fact, more than enough to deal with things like, patent violation and tax evasion. Well, after transplanting the brains of key personnel into cybernetic bodies that would make R2-D2 snigger with derision, mostly consisting of elites, along with a colour fixer from the backstreets, an arbiter of the head that wasn't given the mercy of death, and 2 children from the outskirts. Ayn himself was not exempt from the cycle of samsara. He eventually had enough energy gathered to release the seed of light, that which was intended to cure the disease of the mind that was causing humanity to slowly self-destruct. For almost all involved, it took 50 days. For Angela, it took over 10,000 years. But due to her perceiving time at 1% normal speed, it was more like 1 million years. But for the outside, it was closer to 10 years. Unfortunately, Angela's anger and resentment led to her sabotaging this effort in an act of petty vengeance, deciding to seize the light for herself with the support of Baina, who used to be Garion, arbiter of the head, who was killed as she killed Kali, the Red Mist, who at that time had 1 arm after fighting through many abnormalities and 2 claws. After 3 days of fighting, neither side were in a position where they'd be able to win. So Angela made a deal with them. Gather the light and they'll decide what to do with it after. She then changed the facility, which was brought to the surface, into the library, where she would gather guests and turn them into books to learn more about the city. And believe me, they make for some grim reading. Well, what do you expect? It's a grim, dark setting. Unfortunately, Angela's actions were not without consequences. Distortions started to appear while the library was formed, a byproduct of the white nights and dark days, due to the light only being released for 3 days rather than a full week. Those that passed an emotional threshold and were honest about themselves, well, they collapsed. Many of these distortions were bestial, others were more stable, but didn't exactly have the best brought out of them. Then Roland, a washed-up and disgraced fixer, ended up in the library uninvited, and after a brutal interrogation by Angela, he was put in charge of the floor of general works, and assisted her and the others in gathering the light from the various groups, from Canard to Stars of the City, with some fanboying of the Red Mist along the way. During this, it was discovered that Argalia, the Blue Reverberation, or the Blue Sicko, or Racial Joker as I sometimes call him, was gathering distortions. Some had a personal grievance with Roland, such as the daughter of let's just say that Roland killed her father. Then we have a fixer that he screwed over by obscure fine print in the contracts. A former higher-up of the middle that he slaughtered half of in the south of the city. A man desperately trying to bring his son back to life, only to have him killed by Roland in front of his eyes. And with Argalia, it was because he took his sister from him. A sister that Roland married and was expecting a child with. As for why Roland was there, it's because he had help from a similarly psychotic colour fixer known as Eerie, the Purple Tear, because she was able to point him in the right direction. And it turned out he used to be the Black Silence, who faced a personal loss when Angelica and most of the back streets of District 9 was killed by the pianist. A powerful distortion that drove many of those that survived insane. And after he killed the pianist, he searched for the cause of the pianist, which led to a murderous rampage of vengeance, which led him to be demoted to Grade 9, and with nothing to lose, until Irori offered to help him, where he learned that it was Angela that was responsible for the White Nights and Dark Days. And eventually he revealed his reasons for helping her, and why he stayed his hand after the Reverberation ensemble was turned into books, and she was fully human due to the light being gathered. It was because he wanted to find out for sure what caused it. Wait until it was possible for her to be killed and see if there was any other way. He concluded that there was none, and after a lengthy fight which led to him being on his knees due to the injuries he sustained, Angela not only decided to spare his life, but she also decided to release the light properly this time, accepting responsibility for her own actions, not making excuses for them. Actions which were not that different to what her maker did. Roland decided not to stab her in the back and guard her. Unfortunately, the Reverberation ensemble they were released first, even more distorted than ever. So the others fought them and killed them permanently. And just before Angela faded away, who was fighting Carmen, the voice behind the distortions, and technically her mother, while Ian gave her the recognition that she was craving all her life, Roland pulled her out and she was an android once more. Then 3 people appeared at this point when they weren't in a good position to fight. Representatives of the head, the eye, and the claw. They were there to retrieve Garion, destroy Angela, and dump the library into the outskirts as an impurity, including everyone in it. And despite their best efforts, including a weakened Roland, Gebura, and Bina, ironically, the triumvirate of the city were only successful in achieving the eviction of the library into the outskirts, which suited those within it fine. Now Angela has a new goal. She seeks to fight the head specifically, and to find out why cruelty and suffering are woven into the very fabric of the city. She'll do that alongside her meatbag friend, Roland. But the facility that would become the library was not the only operation of the Bottom Corporation. There were branches within different parts of the city. Each was sealed after the White Nights and Dark Days. The story of one of these branches was covered in Wonderlab. The source of the power they generate was still in there, along with the dangers within. Only the brave, the stupid, or the desperate would go in there. Thankfully, Limbus Company has a mix of all three, which I prefer to call the Damned Dozen. And not just because the Dirty Dozen is taken. Led by Virgilius, the Red Gaze! Managed by Dante, possibly a stable distortion, their backstory was covered in Leviathan, which brings us to the first of the characters that are in Limbus Company. First we have Virgilius, the Red Gaze, a colour fixer of 7 association affiliation, as in the information gathering specialists. 6 months after the orphanage that he brought the children of syndicate members that he killed was destroyed by Tomeri with the help of Iori, the Purple Terror, he and his office, along with a rookie fixer called Garnis, infiltrated a front business of the Ring, one of the Fingers, in order to get information about a potential singularity. The Window technology. One that superimposes alternates from parallel worlds, albeit more unstable than the mirror technology, as it turned almost all of the orphans into distortions. The Ring in that lab were wiped out. The orphans were killed by the abnormality Schadenfreude, although the cocoon that used to be Garnet was still glowing in one fragment. One of his fixers was stabbed in the back by another of his fixers. He in turn was killed by Schadenfreude, and the rest were killed by taboo hunters of Encore for possessing recorded footage within District 14. As that's where the corridor that took them to the lab was in. Virgilius, on the other hand, survived by manifesting his hemokinetic EGO and killed the abnormality. Then Faust appeared and offered him a chance to bring back those that remained. He accepted, and Charon, what Lapis used to be, became the driver of the bus that would take them through what I can't imagine hell to be much worse. As for his personality, he's largely expressionless with a piercing gaze. He holds back on strong emotion, partially because it's tied to one of his augmentations, and he's seen some although he does care about others, certainly enough to minimize collateral damage. In fact, during his fight with Iori, who destroyed debris that would have killed the orphans in the ruins of the orphanage had he not intervened. During this, he needs to be tough. A tough but fair guide, the one in charge, which might lead him to be violent towards others if he's pushed too far. It's currently unclear why he doesn't personally intervene most of the time. As for the source material, well, he's a mix of 2 works. In fact, he's loosely based on the poet Virgil, which has particular relevance in Aeneid, specifically the part of it where he paid Charon, the ferryman of the underworld, with a golden bar that he acquired before descending into the underworld to cross the river Styx, Charon being the driver of the bus that he and the others travel in, and the golden bar being what is in the branches of former Lobotomy Corporation, the source of its power. Virgil is also a character in the Divine Comedy, the guide through hell for Dante, but couldn't go beyond the earthly paradise as he wasn't a believer of Christianity. Virgilius is a guide for Limbus Company in the city. Well, considering that hell, close enough. Next we have Charon, formerly known as Lapis. She was introduced in Leviathan and was revealed to be the daughter of a syndicate boss that Virgilius wiped out. She and the others were put in an orphanage by him, to at least give them a chance to steer clear of that dark path. He even checked up on her and the others, when work didn't prevent him from doing so. She ended up working in a company that transported fruits, but unknown to her, it was a front company of the ring, one of the fingers of the backstreets. Before she was taken to the lab accessible via the corridor, a spatially warping place that connects at least District 14 and District 22, she recorded footage there that led to Virgilius, her friend Garnet, and the others of that office to go on a mission there. Unfortunately, she and the other orphans were subject to the effects of the window technology that was being developed by Azia of Encore, while the others distorted. She didn't. Yes, she survived, but she emerged a completely different person inside. She was then recruited as a driver of the bus that would take Limbus Company through the city, on its quest for what it was looking for. Personality-wise, as Lapis, she had ambitions to taste all the flavours of the city. Well, let's hope she doesn't go to District 23, as we know what they're big on, don't we? She was certainly brave enough to record footage for Garnet to warn him and his office of what the ring was doing, knowing full well what the penalty for that would be in District 14. Moses, the distortion detective, breaking that taboo. She was fortunate enough to get away with losing an arm. After becoming Charon, she was outwardly dead inside, and was a little outside reality. She had no problems with running people over if they were in the way. As for the source material, it's most likely Beatrice from the Divine Comedy. She was Dante's guide for the rest of the way to heaven, from the top of purgatory. As Virgil wasn't qualified for this, as human reason can understand divine grace about as well as totalitarian regimes can understand tolerance of any opinion that doesn't match what it says is right. This is quite appropriate as Virgilius joined Limbus Company, as he wanted to find a way to reverse what had happened to her and one other. He wanted the answer to the question, is it possible? Also, Charon, in Greek mythology, was the ferryman of the underworld, who accepted the golden bar from the Trojan demigod Aeneas in Virgil's Aeneid. Yeah, sorry if I butchered the pronunciation. At times I struggle with English. This was appropriate as she was the one that drove them through what was as close to hell as it can be in that world. Sorry. I think you get the idea by now what that place is. Think Like our world, but much worse. Okay, let's move on. Then we have Dante. This is Limbus Company's pet distortion. Or at least I assume there is distortion. This one has the ability to turn back time. Or rather, to be more accurate, invert it. Although doing this is painful to them. Now, if you want examples of time inversion, look at the Prince of Persia Sands of Time series, the Red Dwarf episode, or the more accurate version of it, the book Backwards. Or if you want something that features heavily in that, well, heavy enough to be noticeable, the movie Tenet. Now, this distortion is not bestial, as they were capable of understanding others and weren't aggressive, although only the 12 main combatants were capable of hearing them. I have my suspicion of who they were. There were certainly enough hints of this in Leviathan, but I won't say them here. They were lacking in memory of who they were, so they tagged along to undo any deaths that might occur in order to get their memory back. Yes. In order to do that. And in the trailer, I assume that was them from the perspective of the sinners. If that was their voice, they sounded like one of those movie trailer narrators. The kind that's been smoking cigarettes since childhood to make a movie sound more epic. They seem willing to help Limbus Company with its mission, although not with direct combat, as they help by undoing the deaths of the damned dozen. Even if it's painful for them to do so, they're largely a blank slate, but they know well enough to not provoke those that are easily provoked. As for the source, Dante is based on Dante Alighieri, a 14th century poet, writer and philosopher, and more specifically, the one who wrote the Divine Comedy, where he travelled through hell, purgatory, and heaven with the help of Virgil, a Roman poet and later Beatrice, in order to get to heaven. Now this is quite fitting, as Virgilius seeks to restore Dante to what they were prior to distorting, in order to undo what some people did to them. Oh yes, I mentioned the damned dozen. Let's move on to them. Let's start with Yi Sang. He used to be the youngest chief researcher of an unknown wing. Well, one thing was clear, it certainly wasn't Elcor. He's certainly a genius, as he's the creator of the mirror technology, which allows the damned dozen, himself included, to access alternates of themselves that have taken a different path in life, along with their weapons and skills to deal with the foes that will inevitably appear for them to deal with. His base form has a stabby knife to use against those that threatens him. As for those, well, his personality, he's the kind that likes to ruminate and doesn't like being disturbed if deep in thoughts, and often speaks in cryptic phrases. He's based on Yi Sang, the author of The Wings, which started with the sentence, "Do you know of a stuffed genius?" As in something is dead but has the illusion of life. Do we know a genius whose life is gone? The content of this short novel is confusing to me, involving a man with a wife that he got through trial and error, doing things that make no sense when she was out and was fed sleeping pills by his wife to keep him there. Although at the time this was written in the 1930s, Korea was suffering from the dual torments of Japanese oppression and the worst aspects of capitalism. Which reflects the ending, where the character wanted to fly away from that harsh environment. Well, quite fitting, as the wings of the world are, they're oppressing their people, each in their own way. And there are those who want to get away from this and truly be free. Not there yet, but they're certainly making a good start on it. The second is Faust. Now she's another genius that has a library of knowledge and wisdom. She was the one that recruited Virgilius and Charon to Limbus Company at the end of Leviathan. And considering that she is the creator of the engine of Mephistopheles, which is the bus that gets them to where they want to go, it's not off by much, if it's off by anything at all. Now she's armed with a Zweihander. She's apparently insufferable to others and is lacking in energy usually, both physically and mentally, although she's subtle about it, and she delivers, both on the intellectual front and on the battlefield. As for what she's based on Faust, a tragic 19th century play by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Yeah, sorry if I've got that wrong. Yes, where Heinrich Faust, a scholar, makes a devil's bargain with Mephistopheles, who is making a bet with God whether or not he can turn him away from righteous pursuits, who previously took of the form of a poodle, where he would serve him in life, but in death, Herr Faust would be his. Although Faust tries to cheat the devil with a bet, make him feel like he wants to live forever, and he would die instantly. Yes, how fitting, as the bus is called Mephistopheles, which is run by an interesting biofuel. Then we have Don Quixote. She's a fixer, or, well, at least she believes herself to be, one that's invested in her part as a righteous one, to the point where if she had a different start in life, she'd make a great actress. She collected all things fixer, and most likely signed up for fun rather than out of desperation. Well, more so the former than the latter. Now, if she was any more nutty, she'd break the fourth wall. She's armed with a big lance. Yes, she's not afraid to use it. In fact, she enjoys her work way too much. She has a wellspring of passion to such an extent that it would make a certain pink hedgehog in the 2000s, in the pursuit of a certain fast blue adrenaline junkie, seem restrained. She also has delusions of grandeur, with some delusional thoughts about what fixers are. Yeah, quite different from what they really are. I'll go over that. Now, she's based on Don Quixote, an epic novel by 17th century writer Miguel de Cervantes, where it involves a minor noble who loses touch with reality, under the delusion that he is Don Quixote de la Mancha. He was not a man of reason, taking inspiration from the books that he's read, where he confuses the inn for a castle, the prostitutes for noble ladies, the innkeeper as the lord of the castle, all of which humour this madman. Then there was a series of other misadventures, including seeing windmills as giants. Yeah. This parallels this member of the Damned Dozen, and her liking what she's doing too much. Yeah. this is going to be interesting, isn't it? The fourth of the damned dozen is Ryosho. This nicotine-addicted wielder of a katana. Well, based on her background image, she seems to have some history with the fingers. Perhaps a personal vendetta against them, but we need to know more about her story for us to know for sure. Although personality-wise, she's a blood knight. The silent kind. As in the kind of person that says, "War is hell? Not for me it is!" Yes, the kind of person that, if they saw the battlefields, they'd have the time of their lives. Although, she's also a woman of honor, not believing in killing senselessly. Now, the source material for this one, well, she's based on Ryosho, short for Ryunosuke Agukata Gawa. The writer of this source material, well, was around in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and he wrote Hellscreen, a short story which was narrated by a servant that observes the story of an artist who was commissioned to paint Naraka, the Buddhist hell, to the point of torturing his apprentices for inspiration. He even tricks his master into burning his daughter in order to complete it. Now, while Ryosho loved combat, this artist's reasons for doing what he did, she would not approve of. Although she does see what she does as an art form. Next we have Milso. Based on his background image and the description of it in The Distortion Detective, he was likely part of Encore, as that nest had, well, it was described to have white buildings. In fact, it had more white buildings than probably all of the Greek coastal areas. In fact, one of the buildings even had an N on it. He was armed with gauntlets, like the Namir workshop gauntlets, the kind that can allow the control of the weight of the sphere at the center of them to augment combat capability, thanks to the gravity-changing spheres of G-Core. Yes, that singularity. Either that or the Alas workshop gauntlets that can increase the speed of the wearer by 5 times, or, well, a workshop technology that is designed for straight-up combat. As for his personality, he's a functional psychopath, as he refuses to cast any moral judgment and wants clear and precise instructions so that the responsibility can't be pinned on him. So that if the command was to throw those thugs into the bus alive, if possible, otherwise, kill them, he would do so without hesitation. Now, he's based on Milso from The Stranger by the early 20th century writer Albert Camus, who, like this member of the Damned Dozen, shows no sign of grief, mourning, guilt, remorse, or empathy, having no problems with helping out a friend and pimp. Now, friend, I use that term loosely. He also decided to manipulate a girl to have sex with him, and then treat her like garbage, throwing her out for accepting gifts from another man. Even helping that friend to get out of criminal charges, when it doesn't go as planned. And when it doesn't go as planned, he proceeded to do certain things only when it suited him. He also openly stated that he didn't feel regret for any of his actions. This is quite similar to this member of the Damned Dozen. In fact, if it weren't for him signing up for Limbus Company, he'd likely meet a similar unfortunate end as the mere assault from the stranger. Yes, I'm trying to keep spoilers to a minimum here, so if you want to know what happens, look it up. The same can be said with the other source material for these characters. Let's move on to Hong Lu. This sheltered man clearly must have done something seriously wrong in order to want to sign up to Limbus Company. Yes, someone of that standing would only do that if there was no other choice. Thankfully, he was able to salvage something before he ended up on a bus going to dangerous places to die over and over again. As he's armed with a guandao. Well, if it's good enough for Zhao, the Maiden of Iron. Now, as far as his personality is concerned, he cares about having a free life, which is what he doesn't have right now. Now, he says what he thinks, even if it's seen as irritating. But what he says because he doesn't know any better, rather than he's doing it on purpose, as he honestly wants to learn more. Well, he's certainly quite sociable, isn't he? Now, this is based on Dream of a Red Chamber, where it involves a sentient stone being transported to see the world, which involves two branches of an aristocratic clan along with a carefree male heir of the family, where it involves a rivalry of sorts and the family's declining fortunes. Yes, the parallel this and Hong Lu would appear to be uncanny. In fact, Hong Lu in Chinese means red chamber. Heathcliff, now, he's a rough man that doesn't hide how he feels or what he thinks. If he thinks at all. He is armed with a large baseball bat, and is as blunt as the damage that he'll end up dealing. He's no stranger to combat based on the scars on his arms. Well, he'd certainly impress the Blade lineage, as they see scars as badges of honor. As for how his personality is, he has anger issues and feels insecure due to a feeling of inferiority that explains this mechanism of compensation. He also prefers to do rather than think. So if you want to use him best, just point in the general direction of the enemy and let him take out his frustrations on them. Well, better than us. Okay, he's based on Heathcliff from Wuthering Heights by 19th century writer Emily Bronte, where due to a series of events it led to him being consumed by anger and feeling wronged, becoming a cruel anti-hero that ended up seeking to destroy all that had wronged him, whether it be real or perceived, even those that once cared about him and also those that had nothing to do with his childhood trauma, with some domestic abuse thrown in. Now, Heathcliff certainly has some anger management issues that require him to be kept in check, or at least given an outlet that won't matter either way, such as an enemy that wants him dead. Well, he can certainly smash their skulls in, although, why didn't they give him a cricket bat? Either that would be too obvious, too insulting, or they honestly didn't think of it. Then we have Ishmael. This ginger-haired wielder of a mace and a shield would probably do well in one of From Software's series for hateful masochists. Certainly with parrying. She also appeared to have been on a boat at some point in her life, based on her nautically themed EGO. Yes, as for her personality, she's an OCD sufferer apparently that would certainly understand Yusord perfectly and probably like him. She prefers reason and can find it difficult to trust others. In fact, she's one of the voices of reason able to maintain control over herself, and despises those that don't practice that themselves. She's based on Ishmael, a character from Moby Dick, written by Herman Melville, a 19th century American writer. An exile of the sea, he was more open-minded towards Moby Dick compared to Captain Ahab's narrow-mindedness. A black and white worldview, and when the whaling boat he was in was destroyed, Ishmael was the only survivor. I suspect that Ishmael had a similar fate as him, although it's unclear what happened to her, at least at the point I'm uploading this. Let's move on to Rodion. This busty, materialistic axe-wielder is from the backstreet, and based on her background intro image, she certainly made her home in District 10, or as I'd like to call it, Korean Las Vegas. Based on her personality, she's a gluttonous hedonist at worst. Yeah, she has gambling issues and also greed and gluttony. They're the primary motivations for her joining Limbus Company, as far as I'm aware. She's also not that interested in following orders unless it suits her, requiring a reminder of who is boss. And she's also flirty occasionally. For some reason I'm thinking of a bat in a catsuit. Now, she's based on Rodion Raskolnikov from Crime and Punishment, written by Fyodor Dostoevsky, a 19th century Russian writer where an ex-law student suffers from extreme poverty, and is not very popular with other students. He kills a corrupt pawnbroker who tends to use his money for his own purposes. Eventually, a prostitute convinced him to confess to his crimes. And yes, I know. How does this connect with Rodya's past? Well, we'll find that out in Chapter 2. I don't want to spoil too much. Now for Emile Sinclair. This halberd-wielding blonde male is a novice with the art of combat, but that doesn't mean that he's incapable of going into combat. Personality-wise, he's insecure and is dependent on positive reinforcement from others, more so than most would need. Although he does have some violent tendencies, yet he's not used to the part of spilling blood and opening people up. Now, he's based on Emile Sinclair from Demian, written by Hermann Hesse, an early 20th century writer. Emile Sinclair was a boy in a middle-class home in a struggle between two worlds, the world of light and the world of illusion, struggling between truth and illusion. He's certainly one with trauma, and his story will be explained in Chapter 3. Now we have Otis. Now, her past is unknown, at least to us, at this point, as the records on her can't be accessed by anyone there. Yeah, that information's confidential, although this woman with a black bob cut is adept at the art of combat strategy. She also knows much about other aspects, such as workshop technologies. She can also perform basic vehicle maintenance, and she wields a curved sword in battle. She thrives on positive reinforcement, but she stays loyal to herself and can focus on things other than the mission. Although she doesn't have a problem with sucking up to those above her, often deferring decisions to those above. Now, she's loosely based on Odysseus from the Odyssey by the Greek poet Homer, where after a certain war involving a huge wooden horse, the Ithacan king took 10 years to get back home after so many detours, including cyclopses, a greedy crew throwing the ship off course, a witch, a trip through the underworld, and the sirens, among other things. Finally, we have Gregor. Now this one is not entirely as one with the cockroach. This might imply that he's either a case of the distortion that's incomplete and he still remains mostly human, or it's due to an experiment that led him to being a similar case to the Hulk. In either case, strong emotion risks him turning in other body parts into insectile parts. His weapon is his insectile right arm. Now, he's not so bad, although he keeps his emotions in check in order to prevent certain issues from occurring, such as losing control of his arm. He's actually quite sociable and stable when he keeps his emotions in check. Now, Gregor is loosely based on Gregor Samsa, a character from Metamorphosis, a novel written by Czech author Franz Kafka. Well, the location is in the Czech Republic now. It used to be part of Austria-Hungary. It was published in 1915, yes, during the First World War. I've actually played a game loosely based on this, where it involved this, in the source material, it involved the character waking up one morning having turned into an insect, who suffered a prolonged torment because of his state. Gregor, well, I'll keep it to myself for now, as that will be covered in the Chapter 1 lore section. But his current condition makes it impossible for him to go back to civilized society, if the city can be considered as such. Now, before we end this intro lore video, there's something I'd like to add. The damage types in Lobotomy Corporation and the Distortion Detective story are a reference to the steps in Limbo: white for a pure soul, red for God's blood, and dark purple for mourning. Atop of it, an angel that's carved out the sins. A reference to pale damage. Sins carved out of the soul. A reference to the Justicia Egio of the Judgment Bird. This is only the start. And not just because I've got the prologue to do a lore video on, among others. Until next time, hail the rabbit!